guys, we're back. I want to go through with you the second part of Cities and Urban Land Use Lecture. And I want to start with the concept of the Central Business District, or CBD. I'll call it a CBD from here on out. So the CBD is the center most focal point. You could call it a node because remember, cities are functional regions, but the CBD is going to be the node of all activity in a given region in a city. And even though it says here it's the easiest part of the city to reach, I know in my city it is definitely not the easiest part to reach due to traffic. So just kind of take that with a gigantic grain of salt. But it is the focal point for all movement within the city, which of course makes it a functional region. So when we look at a CBD and we're talking specifically about services, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. The services that are going to be involved in the CBD, they're going to have a really high range. And remember, our range is going to be the maximum distance that customers will travel for your particular good or service. And they're going to have a very high threshold, which of course is the minimum amount of consumers or customers that you need to have for your particular good or service. So it's got to be something that's going to draw people in, because if they can get what they need out in suburbia, if most people live in suburbia, then they're not going to want to come into the city to get your good or service. So there has to be a really good reason why. And then the only other aspect about retailing in or providing services in the CBD is that you will probably have services that are providing goods or services for workers that work in the downtown area or in the CBD area. So a couple of ideas with regards to products that provide high thresholds. I have up here, you got an image of Marshall Fields. I'm pretty sure it's in Chicago. But when you look at these high threshold retailers, the problem is they are being replaced so quickly by technology, by the Amazons of the world, that most of them are on the verge of collapse. So even as I've taught this over the past few years, I'm beginning to see that this is changing. And pretty soon, I know they keep talking about all of these big retailers that are going to be going out of business, especially because of the impact of the coronavirus and the shutdowns of everything. But the rents are high in the CBD areas, and these poor companies, they just cannot sustain being located in the CBDs anymore. So just kind of keep that in mind when we're discussing this, that this information is changing as we're going through this whole outbreak. I will tell you, though, services with high range, these are going to be really specific services. So I put some photo examples here. You've got a pottery barn in one location. But you know what? I was thinking about this afterwards. You could probably find pottery barns located in some high-end suburban areas or maybe some edge city areas. So that wouldn't even be something that you would see in a downtown CBD anymore, although maybe a Tiffany and Company. And for those of you that don't know, Tiffany and Company is a really famous jeweler. And it wouldn't be someplace that you would go to all the time. At least I hope it wouldn't be someplace that you would go to all the time. But I guess if you can afford it, then good for you. But this would be a draw for people to come in to CBD because of the aspect, the specificity of the items that they are selling. A couple of other things, I mentioned this before, when you're looking at CBDs and the retailers they're in, you will have just some basic services that are being provided. You're always going to have a pharmacy. You're going to have a little mom and pop grocery store, maybe a dry cleaning store to help with the workers that live in the area. But CBDs in North America are going to look really, really different than what you're going to see in Europe. And we'll go through those models on a different lecture. But for right now, just kind of keep that in the back of your mind that they are different. So a couple of other things when we're talking about downtown clustering of services, remember that the cost of that land is going to be really, really high due to the whole concept of bid rent theory. Remember, the closer you are to the CBD, the more valuable that land is, more people are competing for that land. And so the price is going to be driven higher. Think back to Von Tunen when we discussed Von Tunen. When you're competing for that land, people have a specific use for each ring of activity, right? And it's not going to be any different. And we're going to kind of delve into this later on, but it's really not going to be any different than what you would see with the Von Tunen model as you're applying it to the service sector. Also, also this concept of vertical geography. Guys, that's just simply you're building up instead of building out. Land is expensive. You can't necessarily build out with a ton of square footage, but you can build up. So that's something to keep in mind there. We'll skip over that. Okay, so I'm going to give you some amazing advice to help keep you out of poverty. And actually, this is not just my advice. This is just good basic advice. So there are 3 things that you could do to keep you above poverty level, which is about $26,000 per year for a family of 4. The first is you need to get your degree. And in this case, the very basic would be a high school degree. But beyond that, and we know the data, we've looked at the data before in my class, the higher level of education that you receive, the greater the likelihood that you will have a greater earning potential. So your additional degree could be a college degree. It could be perhaps it's a trade school degree, but some kind of degree in addition to high school to show increased knowledge, which people will pay for. Because remember, at its bare minimum, what a degree is people are paying you for the knowledge that is floating around in your brain. The next thing is to stay off of drugs and to not utilize drugs because what ends up happening is drug use and especially addictive drug behavior begins to bleed into your professional life as well, causes people to lose all kinds of jobs, causes people to spend money where they don't need to be spending money. And that inevitably ends up leading people down the road of poverty. And then finally, it's a question of making sure that you do not have children until you are financially ready to have children. What does that mean? It means hopefully having a 2-parent household to be able to provide for both children if possible, but definitely waiting as long as possible to have children until you are financially stable. Okay. The next slide that I want to go to are just some issues that we tend to see in the inner city. First of all, I'm kind of touching back on that aspect of poverty. Poverty, of course, is rampant in some inner city regions. Big issues of homelessness. If you look in the San Francisco area, of course, they've got a gigantic problem with regards to homelessness. Eroding tax base means that you have portions of a particular city where maybe you have like kind of the image up here of this abandoned warehouse where you have businesses that have left and they're not providing any type of tax, property tax money anymore. And so when cities have eroding tax bases, that means that they can't provide services for their citizens. So maybe, dealing with homeless people, homeless shelters, that kind of stuff. Brownfields are going to be areas that used to be industrial. And maybe the industries went out of business. Maybe they up and left and went to China or something like that. But they abandoned the area. And then in the area, you also have some industrial byproduct materials. So it could be dangerous chemicals. It could be mercury, which is a dangerous chemical. But it could be something there that is toxic and that a city has to clean up. And that's expensive to remediate land like this. It becomes very expensive. And so that's why cities often just leave it alone. They become these abandoned warehouse areas where you have a lot of drug activity, a lot of gang activity. And we call it visual blight or urban blight, where it's just not attractive to look at. Now, a lot of cities, to try and take care of these issues, they will offer tax credits or some kind of incentive for businesses to come in, private businesses to come in and clean it up.